in the world is cultural sanctification? Okay, where are you going with this? I have no idea. We have cultural apologetics, now cultural sanctification. What's going on here? What is cultural sanctification?
As I know, I have wrestled with what term to try to use to capture the missiological endeavors of earliest Christianity. So of course, the book is really tracking with the first century, the second century, the third century, before the rise of the Emperor Constantine, trying to examine the lives of Christians prior to that. And as I talk about, they're not saints, but they have a posture. They have a missiological, they have an apologetic, they have an evangelistic posture that is one of engagement that I try to capture. And so I talk a lot about virtue in the book, and I talk about living with virtue, but an embeddedness within a culture that is pagan, that is not Christian, trying to live lives of virtue in which they themselves, as a Christian community, and the institutions that they create and interact with are trying to instill and inculcate virtue or sanctification, sanctifying those kinds of communities, the kinds of culture in which they find yourself. So that's the term I settled on, and I describe it in a little more detail in the book. But it is tough, as you know, it's tough to come up with how to capture
Yeah.
some of those things in a phrase.
It is simply because there's so much flying around right now. We're all trying to scramble to find definitions on how to engage and different narratives to draw from, different stories to look to. And what you've done, and by saying engaging the world like the early church, you're not referring to the book of Acts. You're referring to the first 2 centuries, specifically much more the second century than anything else. Why that period of time?
I begin exactly as you said. I'm focusing on the second century. I mean, given who wrote kind of the history of Rome, the second century is really the height of the Roman Empire. By the time you get to the middle, I mean, Rome is sort of the Pax Romana, the image of Rome that we think of, really comes in the second century. I begin in Acts, and I kind of show, let's say, Paul on Mars Hill, and Paul before Felix and Festus, Paul in Rome. You get the gestures in that direction, and then in like a First Peter 2, live such good lives among the pagans that they see your deeds, or First Peter 3, may always be ready to give a defense. Well, what you find in the second century is all of that taking on lives, all of that, like you meet Polycarp in Smyrna, defending the faith before a Roman proconsul. You meet Justin Martyr writing in Rome apologies to the emperor, defending the faith and explaining the faith. You meet Irenaeus in Lyon writing catechetical manuals to train people to live faithful lives. It's a transitional piece that I just look to some of those impulses, and then try to say, okay, can we learn anything? We learn anything today? I think if you look back at the history of the church, that early centuries where they're living surrounded by paganism are a fascinating kind of intellectual dialogue for today.